The galaxy had been at peace for 12,000 years. 847 species lived together under the Galactic Concord, a great alliance built on treaties and careful respect. Wars still happened sometimes, but they were small and quick. The Concord did not allow chaos. It did not allow violence without reason. And it certainly did not allow dangerous species to roam free without watching them very closely. When humanity made first contact, the galaxy held its breath. The Concord had seen Deathworlders before. They knew about species that came from terrible planets' worlds with crushing gravity, burning radiation, and predators hiding behind every rock. Such species were strong and fast and hard to kill. They were useful in certain situations, but they were also dangerous. The Concord had learned to manage them carefully. The way a farmer manages a wolf that lives near his sheep. Humans came from Earth, a planet that made even experienced Concord scientists uncomfortable. The gravity was high. The atmosphere was filled with a corrosive gas called oxygen. The world was covered in water that could dissolve most metals over time. And the creatures that lived there spent every moment trying to eat each other. The humans themselves were worse. They were persistence predators, which meant they did not chase their prey fast. They chased it slow for hours, for days until the prey was too tired to run anymore. They could survive injuries that would kill most species. They could eat plants and meat and things that were poisonous to nearly everyone else. They healed from wounds that should have been fatal. They kept fighting long after they should have stopped. The Concord welcomed humanity carefully. They gave them a seat at the table, but not a voice. They allowed them to travel, but watched every ship. They smiled at humans in the halls of diplomacy, but they did not invite them to dinner. Captain Park Do-won understood all of this. He was the commander of the diplomatic vessel Sunrise, one of the first human ships allowed to travel freely in Concord space. His mission was simple: make friends, follow rules, and prove that humans were civilized. He had been doing this for 3 years, and he had learned that the job required patience. So much patience. Do-won was a tall man with gray at his temples and calm eyes that rarely showed anger. He had been a soldier once, back on Earth before humanity reached the stars. He knew how to fight. He knew how to kill. But he had put those skills away when he took command of the Sunrise, and he did not intend to use them again. "We are guests here," he told his crew on their first day in Concord space. "Guests do not make demands. Guests do not complain. Guests smile and say thank you and wait to be invited back." His crew was 50 humans, all chosen for their calm tempers and steady minds. They were soldiers and scientists and diplomats, but in the Concord's eyes, they were something else. They were animals pretending to be people. They were wolves wearing sheep's clothing. Lieutenant Kim Yuna was the ship's combat specialist, though she had never fired her weapons in Concord space. She was young and strong, with sharp eyes and quick hands, and she did not have Do-won's patience. "They won't even eat with us," she said one evening, after another species had refused to share a meal. "They think we'll bite them. Maybe we would," Do-won said. "That's not funny. It wasn't a joke." He looked at her steadily. "We are predators, Yuna. We evolved to hunt and kill. Every species in this galaxy knows it. They can see it in our eyes, in the way we move, in the way we watch everything around us like we're looking for weakness. So we just accept their fear? Their insults? We accept their caution. And we prove them wrong one day at a time." Yuna wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that 15 years of perfect behavior should have been enough, that humanity had followed every rule and broken no laws, and still the Concord treated them like dangerous pets. But she saw the look in Do-won's eyes, tired but determined, and she kept her mouth shut. The Villani were the worst. They were a species of crystalline beings. Their bodies made of living gemstone that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. They were beautiful and ancient, and they controlled 3 sectors of Concord space. Their ambassador, a being called Prism of Dawn, made no secret of his hatred for humans. "Deathworlders should be quarantined," he announced at a Concord assembly, while Do-won sat in the observer's gallery and listened. They are animals wearing the mask of civilization. We should not trust them. We should not trade with them. We should not allow them to spread beyond their tiny corner of space." The assembly murmured. Some agreed. Some stayed silent. None spoke against him. Dowan returned to the sunrise that night and sat alone in his quarters. He thought about what he could say to defend humanity. He thought about arguments and evidence and appeals to reason, then he let it go. "We will continue to prove ourselves worthy of the Concord's trust," he said at the next assembly. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that the Villani particularly valued. "We ask only for the opportunity to show who we truly are." Prism of Dawn's crystalline face showed no expression. "You have shown us exactly who you are, Captain. We are simply wise enough to see it." 15 years passed. In that time, humanity applied for 17 colony permits. All were denied or lost in bureaucratic systems. They requested access to 12 trade routes. All were blocked by species who claimed safety concerns. They tried to join councils and committees and working groups, and every door closed in their faces. Still, they waited. Dawan's hair went fully gray. Yuna earned promotions she could not use because no one would accept a human in their command structure. The crew of the Sunrise changed as people retired or transferred, but the mission stayed the same. Be patient. Be polite. Prove them wrong. Some humans back on Earth grew angry. They said the Concord would never accept them, that humanity should stop begging for scraps and take what they deserved. But the government held firm. War with the Concord would be suicide. Humanity was one species against hundreds. They had to make this work. And then, on a quiet morning in the 10th year, everything changed. Dawan was eating breakfast when the alert came. He read the message twice, then a third time, because he could not believe what it said. Something had appeared at the edge of Concord space. Something vast. Something hungry. The harvesters had come, and the galaxy would never be the same. No one knew where the harvesters came from. They appeared at the edge of Concord space like a storm rolling over the horizon, and they brought nothing but death. The first reports were confused. A patrol ship near the border sent a message about strange readings, then went silent. A research station reported seeing something vast moving through space, then stopped transmitting. A colony world sent a distress call that lasted only 6 seconds before cutting off. Then the harvesters reached Kelos Prime, and the galaxy understood. The Kelosin were a peaceful species. They were amphibians with smooth blue skin and large, gentle eyes, and they had never fought a war in their entire history. Their world was covered in warm, shallow oceans and small green islands, and 40 billion of them lived there in floating cities that drifted on the tides. The harvesters came for them in the night. There were billions of ships, if you could call them ships. They were living things, each one a creature of flesh and metal and hunger. They did not have crews. They did not have commanders. They simply ate. They fell on Kelos Prime like locusts on a field of grain. They consumed everything: the water, the land, the cities, the people. They broke the world down into raw material and fed it into their bodies, and when they were finished, there was nothing left but a dead rock floating in space. 40 billion Kelosin died in 6 hours. An entire species, reduced to a handful of survivors on distant colonies. The Concord responded with everything it had. 700 species sent ships, battle cruisers and carriers, destroyers and frigates, fighter squadrons and support vessels. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Over 50,000 ships gathered at a place called the Orion Threshold, the last line of defense before the harvesters could reach the heart of Concord space. Admiral Troy Myra watched them arrive from the bridge of her flagship. The Dawn of Soul. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had commanded human forces for 20 years, and she had never lost a fight, but she had also never seen anything like this. Humanity had been allowed to contribute 12 ships to the fleet. 12 out of 50,000. They were positioned at the edge of the formation, far from the front lines. with strict orders to observe and assist, but not to engage without Concord command. "They don't trust us," her tactical officer said. His name was Ensign Beak Jinho, and he was young enough to still feel angry about such things. "They don't know us," Myra corrected. "There's a difference, is there?" She didn't answer. The harvesters arrived at the Orion threshold 3 days later. They came in a wave that filled the sensors with red, so many ships that the computers couldn't count them all. The Concord fleet moved to meet them, and the battle began. It was a slaughter. The Concord had good ships. They had powerful weapons and brave crews and thousands of years of military tradition. But they had built their fleet for peacekeeping, for patrols, for small conflicts between civilized species. They had never imagined they would need to fight a war of extinction. The harvesters adapted to everything. Energy beams hit their ships and were absorbed, converted into fuel. Missiles exploded against their hulls and were dissolved by clouds of acid that the creatures sprayed from their bodies. Boarding parties tried to land on the enemy vessels and were consumed. Their ships pulled inside and digested. Myra watched the battle from the edge, and she felt sick, a Solani carrier. Pride of its fleet broke apart under concentrated fire. A formation of Villani crystal ships shattered like glass when the harvesters swarmed them. A brave captain from some species she didn't recognize rammed his destroyer into a harvester command node. And for a moment it seemed like it might work, then the harvester simply split in two and kept fighting. "They're dying," Jinho said quietly. His voice shook. "Thousands of ships. Millions of people. I know. Admiral, we could help. We could. I know." But Myra's orders were clear. "Observe only. Do not engage without Concord command." Humanity was still on probation, still proving itself. If they acted without permission, they would be expelled from the Concord. Maybe even attacked, and yet the Concord flagship was a Villani vessel called the Light of 10,000 Suns. It was enormous. A mountain of crystal that blazed with internal fire. And it was the most powerful ship the galaxy had ever built. The harvesters surrounded it. Myra watched as the great ship fired every weapon it had. She watched as it turned and tried to break free. She watched as the harvesters tore it apart, piece by piece, crystal by crystal, until it exploded in a burst of light that briefly outshone the stars. Prism Dash of Dash Dawn was on that ship. His last transmission was a scream that cut off halfway through. The Concord fleet began to retreat. Not in order, not with discipline, but in panic. Ships turned and ran, fighting each other for escape routes, leaving wounded vessels behind. The harvesters chased them, eating everything they caught. Myra closed her eyes. 15 years. 15 years of patience, of following rules, of swallowing insults and smiling at fear. 15 years of proving that humans were civilized, that they could be trusted, that they weren't the monsters everyone thought they were. And now the monsters were here. Real monsters. And the civilized galaxy was dying. "Admiral?" Jinho's voice was tight with urgency. "What do we do?" Myra opened her eyes. She looked at the battle, at the dying ships, at the harvesters that would eat every living thing in the galaxy if no one stopped them. She thought about her orders. She thought about the rules. She thought about 15 years of being a guest. Then she made her decision. "Open a channel to all human vessels," she said. Her voice was calm and cold. "Authorization code Omega-7. Jinho stared at her. "Admiral, I know what it is." She stood up and faced the view screen, watching the harvesters consume another convoy of fleeing ships. "We're done being polite. Tell the fleet, disengage all limiters. Deploy full tactical doctrine. They'll see what we can really do." "Yes," Myra said. "They will." She took a breath. "It's time to stop playing fair." The signal went out to every human ship at the Orion threshold. 12 vessels received it. 12 crews heard the words they had trained for but never expected to use. Authorization code Omega-7. Disengage limiters. Deploy full tactical doctrine. For 15 years, humanity had hidden what it could really do. They had shown the galaxy only what they needed to see enough strength to be respected, not enough to be feared. Their weapons were locked to lower power settings. Their tactics were softened to match Concord standards. Their soldiers were trained to fight with one hand tied behind their backs. Not anymore, on the dawn of Sol. Admiral Troy Myra watched her crew transform. They had been tense and frustrated, forced to sit at the edge of the battle while the Concord died. Now they moved with purpose, their faces hard and focused. "All weapons online," her weapons officer reported. "Full power restored." "Combat algorithms active," another voice called. "Tactical analysis complete. We have targeting solutions." Marines standing by for boarding operations. Myra nodded. "All ships, this is the Admiral. You know what to do? Make it count." The 12 human ships shot forward into the battle. They were not the biggest ships. They were not the most elegant. They were built for a kind of war that the Concord had forgotten existed: total war. Brutal war without mercy or restraint. They had thick armor designed to survive the hell of a Deathworld's atmosphere. They had weapons that civilized species had banned centuries ago. They had crews that had trained for this moment their entire lives. The harvesters noticed them immediately. A swarm broke off from the main assault and moved to intercept hundreds of creatures against 12 ships. The same tactic that had destroyed Concord fleets 10 times that size. The human ships didn't slow down. They didn't try to avoid the swarm. They flew straight into it. Guns blazing, and the harvesters started to die. The creature ships that had shrugged off Concord energy beams couldn't handle human weapons. Railguns fired solid metal slugs at incredible speeds, punching through organic hulls like needles through cloth. Plasma cannons burned at temperatures hot enough to melt steel, and the harvesters had no steel to resist them. Missiles designed to burrow deep before exploding tore the creatures apart from the inside, but the weapons were only part of it. The real shock was the humans themselves. Sergeant O'Tayson led the first boarding party. He was a big man with scars on his hands and a quiet way of speaking that made people lean in to listen. He had 40 Marines under his command, and he had trained them for this exact situation. "We're going inside," he told them as their shuttle approached a harvester carrier. "Find the brain, kill it, get out." "Inside?" one of his Marines asked. "Inside the creature?" "That's right." The shuttle punched through the harvester's outer hull and lodged itself in the creature's flesh. The Marines poured out in powered armor, weapons ready, and found themselves in a nightmare. The interior of the harvester was alive. Walls of muscle and bone surrounded them. Acid dripped from the ceiling. Things that might have been immune systems, white shapes with too many limbs, came screaming out of the darkness to stop them. The Marines killed everything they met. They moved fast, following the neural pathways deeper into the creature. They burned through walls. They blasted through organs. They did not hesitate, did not slow down, did not show any sign of the fear that would have stopped any civilized species. This was what Deathworlders did. They went into the dark places. They faced the monsters. They kept going when everything told them to stop. Tay-sun found the brain 16 minutes after they entered. It was a massive thing, pulsing with light, protected by a final ring of defenders. His Marines were down to 23, the rest dead or too wounded to continue. "Charges set," his demolitions expert reported. "Everyone out," Tayson ordered. They ran. Behind them, the explosives detonated and the harvester carrier went dark. It drifted in space, dead, a mountain of flesh that would never eat again. Tayson's was the first kill. It was not the last. Pilot Shin Yoonji flew a fighter that the Concord had called unnecessarily aggressive when they first saw its specifications. She had spent 3 years flying patrol routes at half speed, pretending that her ship wasn't capable of things that would make the galaxy's best pilots. Weep. Now she stopped pretending. She dove into an acid cloud that had dissolved a squadron of Villani fighters. Her hull was built for atmospheric re-entry on worlds. With sulfuric rain and methane storms, the harvester's acid barely left a mark. She emerged on the other side and found herself facing a harvester command node. A creature the size of a city that coordinated the swarm's attacks. She was carrying 6 nuclear warheads. The Concord had asked humanity years ago why they still possessed nuclear weapons. Such things were relics of a barbaric age, tools of mass destruction that no civilized species would ever use. Captain Park Do-won had smiled and called them cultural artifacts. Yoonji armed all 6 and fired them into the command node's open mouth. The explosion lit up the battlefield. The command node vanished in a ball of fire that briefly outshone the local sun. Around it, hundreds of harvesters went wild, their coordination lost, their swarm instincts broken. They turned on each other, attacking anything that moved. "Target destroyed," Yoonji reported. Her voice was calm and professional, as if she had done nothing more than complete a training exercise across the battlefield. The tide was turning, the 12 human ships carved through the harvester's swarm like knives through meat. They were everywhere at once, hitting hard and moving fast, never giving the creatures time to adapt. They used tactics that the Concorde had never seen brutal. Efficient, designed not to defeat an enemy but to destroy it completely. The surviving Concorde ships watched in shock. They had seen Deathworlders before, but never like this. "Never unleashed. What are they doing?" The Solani fleet commander transmitted. His voice was filled with something that might have been fear. Admiral Myra heard the question. She could have explained about human evolution, about the millions of years spent fighting and dying on a world that wanted to kill them. She could have talked about persistence and adaptation and the refusal to give up no matter the odds. Instead, she gave a simpler answer. "Winning," she said. "We're winning." The battle continued for 4 more hours. When it ended, the harvester's swarm was broken. Not destroyed, there were 2. Many for that, but hurt badly enough to retreat. They pulled back to the edge of Concorde space, bleeding and confused. And they did not return. The Orion threshold was saved, but as the surviving Concorde ships looked at the human vessels, battered but unbroken, surrounded by the corpses of their enemies, they realized that something had changed. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The Deathworlders had stopped playing fair, and everyone had seen what happened when they did. The silence after the battle was worse than the fighting. Admiral Troy Myra stood on the bridge of the Dawn of Sol and looked out at what remained. Debris filled the space around the Orion threshold, pieces of ships, clouds of gas, bodies floating in the void. The Concorde had come with 50,000 vessels. Less than 30,000 remained. Humanity had come with 12 ships. 9 were still operational. The numbers told a story that Myra knew would spread across the galaxy within hours. The Concorde's greatest fleet had been broken by the harvesters. Humanity's tiny force had turned the tide. 300 years of careful diplomacy, 15 years of patient submission, all of it burned away in a single day. "Admiral," Ensign Baek Jin-ho said quietly, "the Concorde is requesting a full report on our activities." "I'm sure they are. They want to know about our weapons, our tactics, everything." Myra nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come. Every secret humanity had kept for 15 years was now exposed. The Concorde had seen what humans could really do, and they would have questions. Many questions. "Tell them we'll provide a full briefing," she said. "And tell them we're ready to help with rescue operations. There are survivors out there." The rescue took 3 days. Human ships moved through the debris fields, pulling survivors from broken vessels, treating the wounded, recovering the dead. They worked alongside Concorde crews, and Myra noticed that the other species kept their distance. They accepted help when it was offered, but they didn't come close. They watched the humans with new eyes, not with fear, exactly. Something more complicated than that. Captain Park Do-won was among the dead. The Sunrise had been destroyed in the battle. Do-won had ordered his ship to ram a harvester dreadnought that was attacking an evacuation convoy, 3 vessels carrying civilians from a colony world. The Sunrise hit the creature at full speed, breaking its spine, killing it instantly. The convoy escaped. The Sunrise did not. Lieutenant Kim Yuna survived. She had been on one of the evacuating ships when it happened, helping wounded Villani to the escape pods. The crystalline beings had sharp edges that cut human skin, and by the time she was done, her hands were covered in burns and blood. She didn't seem to notice. Myra found her sitting alone in a cargo bay, staring at nothing. The Admiral sat down beside her and didn't speak for a long time. He knew, Una finally said. When he gave the order to ram, he knew he wasn't coming back. Yes, 15 years of being careful. 15 years of playing by their rules. And in the end, he threw it all away for 3 ships full of people who would have let him die. Myra considered this. Would he see it that way? Una was quiet. Then she shook her head. No, he would say it was worth it. He would say that's who we are. Then maybe that's the answer. The Concord Assembly met 1 week after the battle. Representatives from every surviving species gathered in the Great Hall, and for the first time in 15 years, humanity was not watching from the observers' gallery. They had a seat at the main table. Ambassador No Jian took that seat alone. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and a face that gave nothing away. She had been a diplomat for 20 years, and she had spent most of that time being ignored. Now every eye in the chamber was on her, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. The Solani representative spoke first. He was a tall being with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with his emotions. Right now it was deep red anger or fear. Jian couldn't tell. You lied to us, he said. You came to us as friends, as supplicants, and you lied about what you were. Jian kept her voice calm. We never lied. Your weapons? Your tactics? You hid your true capabilities from the Concord. You pretended to be weak when you were strong. We pretended to be polite, Jian corrected. There is a difference. The chamber erupted in voices. Some shouted agreement with the Solani. Others called for silence. A few species, those whose ships had been saved by human intervention, said nothing at all. You violated the terms of your membership, another representative called. You possessed weapons that are banned by Concord law. We possessed weapons that were never specifically prohibited, Jian replied. We disclosed our full military capabilities when we joined as required. Everything we used in the battle was in those reports. Then why did no one know about them? Jian let a small pause stretch out. Because no one read the reports. Because no one believed that humans, Deathworlders, animals could build anything worth studying. You assumed that what we showed you was all we had. She paused again. That assumption was your choice, not our deception? The Solani's skin flushed darker. You should have told us. We did tell you. You didn't listen. The argument went on for hours. Some representatives demanded humanity's expulsion from the Concord. Others wanted restrictions placed on human military development. A few called for humanity to be quarantined, locked away where they couldn't threaten anyone. But there were other voices too. Species whose worlds had been saved spoke in humanity's defense. Crews who had been rescued from dying ships told their stories. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. It was a young Kellison who ended the debate. She was one of the few survivors of her species. A diplomat named Brightwaters who had lost her entire family when Kelos Prime was destroyed. She was barely an adult by Kellison standards, and she spoke with a voice that shook with emotion. They could have let us die, she said. All of us. They had no obligation to help. The Concord had treated them badly for 15 years, and they could have watched us burn and said we deserved it. The chamber was silent. Instead, they revealed secrets they had kept for years, secrets that made them safe. They knew that once we saw what they could do, we would fear them. We might even attack them. And they helped us anyway. Brightwaters looked at Jian. Why? Jian thought about Dowan, dying on the bridge of the sunrise. She thought about Yuna's burned hands. She thought about all the humans who had given their lives for people who had treated them as monsters. Because that is who we are, she said. We are Deathworlders. We evolved to survive anything. But survival without compassion is just existence. We chose to be more than that. The chamber was silent for a long moment, then, slowly, Brightwaters nodded. I believe you, she said. And I think in time the rest of the galaxy will believe you too. The vote came 3 hours later. Humanity was not expelled. They were not restricted. Instead, by a margin of 63%. They were granted full membership in the Galactic Concord, the same rights, the same voice, the same place at the table as any other species. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. But it was a start. Jian returned to the human delegation and found Yuna waiting for her. The lieutenant's hands were still bandaged, still healing from the burns she had received saving Villani lives. "Well?" Yuna asked. Jian allowed herself a small smile. "We're in. Full membership. Just like that?" "Just like that." Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "Dawan would have been happy," she said. 15 years of patience, and we finally get what we wanted." "Yes," Jian agreed. "Though I don't think this is how he imagined it happening." They stood together in silence, thinking about the price they had paid and the road that lay ahead. The galaxy had seen humanity's true face, not the mask of civilization they had worn for 15 years, but the thing beneath it. The predator. The survivor. The Deathworlder. Now they had to figure out what came next. 50 years passed, the galaxy changed in ways that no one had expected. The harvesters never returned in force, though scouts were spotted at the borders from time to time. The Concord rebuilt its fleets with new designs, many of them based on human technology. Species that had once refused to share meals with humans now sent their children to study at human academies, and the Battle of Orion Threshold became a legend. Professor Han Sun-hee was the first human appointed as an official historian to the Concord archives. She was a small woman with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers, and she had spent her entire career studying the moment that changed everything. Her office was on a station orbiting the old battlefield. Through her window she could see the memorial, a vast structure built by 100 species to honor the dead. It glowed softly in the darkness, a beacon for ships passing through. "Why did you want to meet here?" her assistant asked. He was a young Callison named Tidesong, one of a new generation born after the destruction of Kalos Prime. "There are more comfortable places to work." Sun-hee smiled. "I wanted to see it while I finished the book. It felt right." The book was her life's work, the definitive account of the Battle of Orion Threshold. She had traveled to 100 worlds to write it, interviewing survivors, collecting stories, gathering fragments of memory into a single whole. "Now it was almost done. Can I ask you something?" Tidesong said. "Of course. What do you want people to understand? When they read this, what's the message?" Sun-hee thought about the question. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the years, and she still wasn't sure of the answer. "I want them to understand that we meant it," she said finally. "Everything we did for those 15 years, the patience, the politeness, the bowing and smiling and waiting, we meant all of it. But you were also hiding your weapons. Your true strength." Yes, both things were true at the same time. She turned to look at him. "Humans are not simple creatures, Tidesong. We can be gentle and fierce. We can wait for years and act in seconds. We can forgive and we can fight. We are all of these things together." Tidesong considered this. "The legend says that humans are dangerous. We are. But it also says you saved us. That you revealed your secrets to protect people who had treated you badly." Sun-hee nodded. "That's the part I want people to understand. The legend isn't about humans being dangerous, everyone knows that already. The legend is about why we were patient and why we stopped." "And why did you stop?" Sun-hee was quiet for a moment. She thought about her grandmother, Kim Yuna, who had died peacefully at the age of 93. The old woman's hands had still shown scars from that day 50 years ago, when she had carried wounded Villani to escape pods and let their crystal bodies cut her skin. Sun-hee had asked her once, when she was young, why she had done it. Why save people who hated you? Why suffer for people who thought you were an animal? Yuna had smiled and said something that Sun-hee had never forgotten. "Because they were dying, and I could help, and that was enough." "We stopped," Sun-hee told Tidesong, "because you were dying. And we could help? And that's all the reason we ever needed." The book was published 6 months later. It was translated into 300 languages and distributed across the Concord. For the first time, the galaxy had a complete account of what had happened at the Orion threshold, not just the battle, but the 15 years before it, and the 50 years after. It changed how people thought about humans. Not everywhere, and not all at once. There were still species who feared humanity, who saw them as predators wearing masks, who wanted them locked away where they couldn't hurt anyone. But there were also new voices now speaking a different message. The humans were never tame. They never pretended to be weak. They were always what they were: Deathworlders, survivors, the children of a world that wanted to kill them. But they chose, deliberately and consciously, to be kind. They chose to be patient. They chose to believe that the galaxy could accept them, even when all evidence pointed the other way. And when the darkness came, they chose to fight for people who had given them nothing but contempt. That choice meant something. It meant that strength and compassion could exist together. It meant that being dangerous didn't make you a monster. It meant that the most feared species in the galaxy could also be the most trusted. If they earned that trust, it meant that humanity was exactly what they had always said they were. Dangerous, yes, but also good. Sun-Hee attended the memorial ceremony that year, as she did every year. She stood with the families of the fallen and watched as representatives from 100 species laid tributes at the base of the structure. Flowers and crystals and song and silence, all of it offered to those who had died. She thought about Captain Park Do-won, whose name was carved on the memorial's central pillar. She thought about his patience, his dignity, his refusal to be anything less than what he believed humanity could be. He had spent 15 years proving that humans were civilized, and in the end, he had died proving that they were something more. He had died proving that they were brave. The ceremony ended, and the crowd began to scatter. Sun-Hee stayed a while longer, looking at the stars. "Professor?" Tidesong appeared beside her. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Just thinking about what?" She smiled. "About stories. About how they get told and retold until they become something larger than themselves. This battle, it happened 50 years ago, and it only lasted one day. But people will remember it for centuries. Maybe forever. Is that what you wanted? For people to remember?" "I wanted people to understand." She looked at him. "The legend of the Battle of Orion Threshold isn't about weapons or tactics or military might. It's about a choice. We were hurt and angry, and we had every reason to let the galaxy burn. Instead, we saved it. We revealed our secrets, we gave up our safety, and we fought for people who had never fought for us. Why?" Sun-Hee laughed softly. "You keep asking that question?" "Because I still don't understand the answer." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a story my grandmother used to tell me. She said that when she was carrying wounded Villani to the escape pods, her hands were burning. Their crystal bodies were cutting her skin. And she kept going anyway, because she knew that if she stopped, they would die. That must have hurt." "It did." "She had scars for the rest of her life." "Then why did she keep going?" Sun-Hee looked up at the memorial, at the names of the dead carved in stone, at the tribute that 100 species had built to honor their sacrifice. "Because that's who we are," she said. "We're Deathworlders. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We evolved to survive anything: pain, fear, loss, despair. And somewhere along the way, we learned that survival isn't enough. We learned that the only thing that makes survival worth anything is what you do with it." She turned to Tidesong, and her eyes were bright. "The humans were never tame," she said. "We chose to be kind. And when kindness wasn't enough anymore, we chose to be brave. That's the legend. That's what people remember." Tidesong nodded slowly. "The day the Deathworlders stopped playing fair, yes." Sun-Hee smiled. "And may the galaxy never forget what happened when we did." She stood there for a while longer, watching the stars. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the memorial behind. The legend would continue. It would be told in nurseries and academies, in halls of diplomacy and military briefings, passed down from generation to generation until the words became something almost sacred. The Deathworlders came to us as guests. They endured our fear and our cruelty with grace. They asked only to be accepted. And when darkness came for us all, they stopped pretending not to hurt us, but to save us. Remember this, the humans were never tame. They chose to be kind. And that made all the difference.